This talk begins with a perfect, comprehensive definition of the word love. But wait, I can't do that, can I? Nobody can do that. It's true that love is perceived differently for everyone, but at the same time, it's so universal and shareable and recognizable. So why can't we give it a definition? The same goes for words like God, freedom, peace, and less obviously, for true statements like, as a kid living in America, I used to go across the street to my friend's house and watch TV. Visualize that for a second. I bet that images are popping into your mind of a younger version of you at the house of your childhood friend from across your street, watching their TV. I mentioned America, so you may even imagine a distant Walmart across the picturesque rolling green hills. But that's just the problem, because that's not what I said. I've never been to this place that you've just imagined. The images in my head were lost in translation just as soon as I turned them into words. They became further ambiguous when your brain turned them into images that made sense to you. Unfortunately, this is not just the problem of people who are bad at describing things. This is the problem of the UN as they're discussing world issues, of the press as they're bringing you information, and of you, and everyone you've ever spoken to. However, I was not the first or the most eloquent person to notice this. Ludwig Wittgenstein was an Austrian philosopher who lived in the 20th century, during which he wrote Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. In this book, he says we have relatively clear pictures of how the world is in our minds, but the language we use is inherently too vague to accurately convey these pictures. He elaborates, what can be said at all can be said clearly, and what we cannot talk about we must pass over in silence. The way I see his work, it talks about a world that is logical, but drowns in meaninglessness just as soon as we talk about it, with this meaninglessness increasing the more subjective the phrase is. Object A weighed 5.5 kilograms at noon today would be one extreme with little to no margin of misinterpretation, whereas the romantically setting sun smiled down on my weary bones from across the wilderness and I knew I had reached my destiny would be the opposite, meaning nothing whatsoever. As you can see, I've annotated all the bullcrap that I deliberately put into the sentence to make it mean nothing. It's riddled with abstract nouns, human misconceptions, and vague language in general. Much like the word love, this sentence correlates with no clear reality. But we don't ramble on about love and death and freedom because we're trying to pin them down objectively by trial and error. We do it because when we talk about them, we touch on something greater than ourselves. All the songs on the radio are about destiny and faith, or at least what the songwriter thinks those things are. And these are the topics that logic and reason find most repulsive because these things can't be quantified or considered objectively. An extreme example of a linguistic catastrophe is in George Orwell's 1984, in which the government introduces this alternative language called Newspeak, designed to shrink the limits of the human mind by having so few words that only a very limited range of experiences can be described in very limited ways, thereby keeping the oppressed people from questioning their government. It worked. But somebody else had this same idea over 100 years before the book was published. Wittgenstein said, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." Unlike me, he didn't need Orwell to tell him that. Why? Because he recognized that we're already there, using our own newspeak. While we do have fewer problems questioning our governments, we do have problems, as I've said, defining the abstract. That's where art comes in. It's a tool for understanding and communicating the abstract emotional mysteries of the human heart in a way that a dictionary just can't. So at this point you may ask yourself, why does this matter? This is not a problem I can reach out and touch. But yes, it is. I, like so many of my generation, am clinically depressed. I was diagnosed 2 years ago and have been getting increasingly better, more or less. But that severely afflicted self 2 years ago would have agreed with me that possibly the hardest part of depression is feeling things that words can't say. When you feel something that words can't say, you can't articulate your thoughts, thereby keeping anyone from relating, thereby isolating yourself in this little bubble of things that it seems only you can feel. When I did try to use language to communicate what I was thinking, it would often come out as, "I'm in hell," or something equally as primitive, because the language I was using was inherently too shallow to describe the depths of my thoughts. But where words failed me, art spoke the unspeakable. This is a piece I did a year before my diagnosis. I would go for these long walks and have this sensation of the world kind of exploding around me, because what was going on inside my head was being projected onto the outside. This is another depression-oriented piece, believe it or not. I won't tell you what it means, but I will give you a one-sentence description. A small red elephant is dwarfed by a large and strange blue building? What does that sentence remind you of? It reminds you of the made-up bullcrap sentence, doesn't it? Because on a surface level, it means absolutely nothing, but on a human level that's impossible to talk about, it captured what I was feeling in that moment, and maybe helped heal me in some small way. What can be said at all can be said clearly, and what we cannot talk about we must pass over in silence. So says Wittgenstein. But in the end, is it our hollow words that hurt us? Or is it our sterile lack of communication about the things that matter most to us? So open up to art as a form of communication. Because in a world that looks like Object A weighed 5.5 kilograms at noon today, only you can shout the beauty of the human experience into the unknown and hear the echo in the heart of the people sitting next to you. Thank you.